Hello, I'm Jonathan White, and welcome to the Parliamentary Review Roundtable, our monthly roundup of the political scene here in Westminster and how it's affecting people and businesses across the United Kingdom, for better or worse. It would be one heck of an understatement to say that the last month or so in politics has been hectic. It was less than a month ago that a certain Downing Street source, who definitely wasn't a Mr. D. Cummings of Islington, said that following a phone call between the PM and Chancellor Merkel, that a Brexit deal was essentially impossible. Impossible. Shows how much a Downing Street source knows. A new deal was confirmed and a special sitting of Parliament announced for a Saturday, the first such sitting since the Argentine invasion of the Falklands. The stage was set and the House of Commons was going to make a momentous decision. The decision was not to make a decision. The PM, instead of dying in a ditch, requests an extension to Article 50. Rejoice. When the House returned, the now old Speaker, Bercow, says the government can't bring the motion back. And when it finally does, MPs actually vote for it. Success, I hear you cry. Hold your horses. The proposed timetable is rejected. A general election looks inevitable. The Tories say they don't want one, but there has to be one. Labour and the SNP say they want one, but not yet. The Lib Dems are just happy to be involved. And why not, the Commons doesn't vote for one. The next day, they try again. And after excluding amendments, thanks to Deputy Speaker, now Speaker, Sir Lindsay, that would have allowed children and foreign nationals to vote, we can look forward to Christmas being ruined with a 12th of December polling date, the season of goodwill and all that. Oh, and by the way, there was a Queen's speech somewhere along the way. Does anyone remember that? We're joined on our panel today by our Chief Editor, David Curry, and Company Director, Craig Wilmann. Welcome both. The campaign is kicked off. We're a few weeks into it. David, you have seen a fair few campaigns in your time. How do you see this one panning out for the Tories?
I've fought 9 elections, as a matter of fact. Won 7, lost 2 is my score.
Not bad.
It's looking okay in the sense that Farage is looking dishevelled, finished and in a mess. His party is not happy. He has been sounding very hesitant for the first time in the media, unlike him. He's not fighting seats where the Conservatives are in the lead, and his own people are getting very fed up. I think they're looking bad, and I think that Boris will enjoy that. That'll be good for Boris. But he's still fighting seats which are held by Labour. And the problem for the Conservatives is that if we assume, for example, that in Scotland, the SNP could do well, they've got 35 out of the 59 seats now. If they add a few more, that gives them a block of, say, 40 or perhaps 40 plus seats. If we assume that the Liberal Democrats will do a little bit better in the south of England, I don't believe that the Liberal Democrats are going to be, there's going to be some sort of avalanche to the Liberal Democrats. Translating votes into seats is very difficult in the British system. But let's say they add some, because they only got 12 at the end of the last election. Their numbers now are because of defectors, and most defectors have got to fight seats or find new seats to fight.
It does seem at this rate, David, if they could induce every other former Tory cabinet minister to vote for them, they might stand a chance.
Well, they might stand a chance, but they're not going to form a government. I mean, that's Father Christmas absolutely writ large. But that means that Boris does need to win 40-plus Labour-held seats in order to form a majority. And there's a big question mark over whether he will do that. Meanwhile, I mean, the Labour campaign looks in absolute chaos. As you would expect. Then Tom Watson, the deputy leader, has quit, but he says he'll campaign to support the party. Other Labour people have said, well, vote Conservative because we don't trust Corbyn. He can't make up his mind what he actually wants to do with the NHS. He can't make up his mind about Scottish devolution. And quite frankly, the left hand doesn't know what the other left hand is doing as far as Labour's concerned.
Absolutely. And now, I think before we get carried away and go in the Labour Party too soon, Craig, I know that, and David's referenced it, I was having dinner with a friend last night, and he pointed out that a CCHQ are treating places like Surrey South West, like Guildford, as marginals. And as David pointed out, the Tories need to pick up these 40 or so seats off of Labour. How do you see that panning out?
Well, I think one of the biggest knock-on effects from the Brexit Party standing down in the Tories' existing seats is it alters the strategy that the Tories can take. The Tories are now much more able to go on the attack. They've got to spend a lot less time defending seats, particularly, as David alluded to, the Tory and Lib Dem marginals, where the Brexit Party would have been liable to take a number of votes off the Tories. So I think we can expect to see CCHQ pour their resources now into those 40 plus seats they've got to take off Labour. And we'll have to see how that pans out. I think, as many people have pointed out, the days of universal swing seem to be over. So, I think we're looking at an average 10-point poll lead for the Tories, but what does that actually mean in terms of seats?
Oh, quite right. I mean, UNS is dead. It's even at county level, it seems to be dead. Perhaps it's more of a city and countryside swings instead. If the district voted Remain, if the district voted Leave, it matters far more than even what class you are. There was a poll out from Comrades just in the last 24 hours that said the Tories have a 20-point lead with C2DE voters.
Right.
What we would call working class, and only a 9-point lead among ABC1. Now, just 10 years ago, could you imagine that being the case?
Absolutely not. I'm sure it's even more surprising to David, who was an MP.
Quite right, David. You wouldn't have guessed ever.
What we are seeing, this is the seismic shift in the tectonic plates of politics caused by Brexit. I mean, if you look at the by and large, we ought to be very careful about saying this, but by and large, people with a college degree voted Remain, and people without it voted Leave. So basically, those CDEs or whatever, by and large, are much more likely to have voted to Leave, and so they're more attracted for Conservatives, and the others are more attracted to the Remain parties. And I think that is what's happening to shift those plates. But at the same time, there is a tremendous suspicion of Jeremy Corbyn. Let me tell you a little story. I mean, yesterday I went to the dentist. Now, when you're in the dentist chair, it does tend to be a monologue on the part of the dentist. It's quite difficult to actually engage in the conversation when you've got your mouth open to somebody sort of poking around in your teeth. But here was a chap, he was telling me, well, what if Corbyn won, the country would come to a halt, there'd be bankrupt, nobody would invest. There was a diatribe of 20 minutes. Not provoked by me. I didn't start any of this. I just wanted to talk about my dogs. But he went on and on and on and on. And actually, this is happening everywhere. And I think what the real problem for Corbyn is that, and the real problem also for the Liberal Dems and others, is that when people get into the polling station and they're standing there, the ballot paper is there sort of naked in front of them, they've got the pencil in their hand, they're going to say, dare I risk it? Dare I risk it? And in the end, they'll put their cross in the Conservative corner.
And I think it's spot on, David. And I think the party is feeling more confident about wavering soft Tories in Surrey and Hampshire, saying, well, I can't risk voting Liberal. I don't want Corbyn to get into power. The problem is the other side, as you've already mentioned. Can people that have never voted Tory before in the North East, the North West and the West Midlands, and this didn't work in 2017 with the Tories, can they go into that booth and put their cross next to the Tory box?
I come from the north of England. It's hard work. You will hear people say, if I voted Conservative, my grandfather would turn in his grave. And it's tribal. But the tribes are actually breaking down a little bit. And I think they will not say it, but some people will, in the end of the day, actually vote Conservative, saying, well, this is a one-off because of particular circumstances. And also there is amongst traditional Labour voters a distrust of Labour. I mean, the problem is that all parties of the left, whether they're hard left, which is where the Labour leadership is, or the soft left, like Social Democrats, have got a real problem at the moment because they have two electorates. They have one electorate is their old-fashioned traditional working-class vote. The other electorate is the more metropolitan, white-collar, college-educated, middle-class vote. And they're not interested in the same things. And they've got to, how do we reconcile this?
Yes.
Your working class vote is tremendously, very, very conservative, particularly conservative on sort of social issues, LGBT, gay marriage, all this sort of thing. Your metropolitan vote is, of course, much more concerned in these things which we now call woke issues.
What does that mean, David? I've got no idea.
My dear fellow, you should keep up to date with these things. Woke is alert to all forms of discrimination and people not being treated fairly. It comes from awaken. When you're woke, you've been awakened. And and they have a difficulty in reconciling these. And in the Labour Party, what have you got? You've got some of their leaders are straight out of the sort of white-collar metropolitan background and represent white-collar metropolitan seats. You've got others which are from their traditional trade union working-class background. And they find it difficult to talk to each other.
And I think, since we're on the topic now, in terms of that Labour campaign, they did this very successfully 2 years ago. They started about 24% in the polls, and they climbed and closed almost an impossible gap. The question is, and Craig, perhaps if you can answer this one, do they have it in them this time to close that gap again?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, you mentioned a few minutes ago that the Tories need to attract voters in seats that they've never won. And you said it didn't work in 2017, but they did get the votes. The trouble is that they got 42% of the vote. It was one of the best Tory vote for years. The trouble is that Labour also did incredibly well, and it became a two-horse race. And I think Labour went from 24%, as you say, up to 40%, but the Tories pretty much stayed around 42%.
Resulted in a swing to Labour.
Yeah, well, that's of course the case. So I think what happened last time is we saw the UKIP vote collapse from 10% to 2%. I think we're going to see something similar with the Brexit Party now. I think a lot of those went to the Tories, some went to Labour, and then I think you saw a lot of people who at the beginning of the campaign had said that they were going to vote Tory, then drifted towards Labour. And I wonder if they did that because there was a concern in 2017 that the Tories were going to get too big a majority, and people felt, well, they were safe to vote Labour. I don't think anyone's going to be thinking that now, no matter how big the polls get. So that'll be interesting. If people are going to the polls knowing that there is a chance of Corbyn as Prime Minister, will they still vote for him?
I'm losing count of the number of former ministers, former Labour MPs that have said they're voting Conservative. I don't know if you've seen Kate Hoey this morning, but she will be voting for the Democratic Unionists in North Antrim. So I don't know if any ex-Labour MPs now voting for the Labour Party. Is that going to help? Well, I mean,
Kate Hoey probably has been the DUP member for Vauxhall for quite a while. So that's not that much of a surprise. We saw it with Ian Austin last week and a number of others. But of course, strangely, we've had David Gauke come out this week and say that traditional Tories should vote Lib Dem. I think we've had a Lib Dem saying that she's going to vote Labour. I think everybody, and Farage apparently might be voting Conservatives. It's all very confusing.
The first time in history a party leader might be voting for a other party. It's quite extraordinary. David, have you ever seen anything like this before?
No. It is
a fair answer.
In the past, elections are rather well-organised and well-ordered affairs. Your party leaders and senior people galloped around the country. What you desperately wanted is for them not to visit your constituency because it entirely screwed up your plans for the whole day. And the manifesto came out, and by and large, it wasn't anything which you disliked. I mean, I must make a confession that having fought 9 elections, I never yet read the party manifesto. And I doubted many of my colleagues. I mean, manifesto is still a week away, don't forget. The election's been underway for more than a week, and there's still a week to go before anybody actually publishes a manifesto. So I think that the fragmentation we're seeing now, and you're quite right, we're seeing Labour MPs or ex-MPs saying vote Tory. We're seeing Tory ex-MPs either going over to the Liberal Democrats or recommending voting for Liberal Democrats. And the whole thing is looking very fragmented. The reason why, we should be careful before we draw too many conclusions from the 2017 election. I mean, what happened there is the Conservatives fought a cataclysmically awful campaign. I am told Theresa May didn't want to fight a campaign and didn't actually want to fight the campaign.
Some people would say she didn't.
She was very wooden. The thing lacked any sort of sense of spontaneity, and the fatal thing, the social care bit was absolutely fatal, whereas Corbyn is at his best on the stump. I mean, yes. he's very good at campaigning, and he got a significant youth vote, which is not there at the moment. All the soundings, all the polls indicate that he's not going to get that sort of surge from new voters, which happened last time. And the other problem is, don't forget, I mean, 3/4 of the Labour MPs actually wanted to get rid of Corbyn. I mean, he hasn't got the support of his party, and there must be some Labour MPs who are saying, I want to keep my seat, but actually I don't want the party to win. Then we can get rid of Corbyn, then we might get a sane leader.
There is also, I think, a far more serious and somewhat pernicious element in this campaign, and it was just a week ago that the Jewish Chronicle had quite an extraordinary front page, which pleaded they said to their non-traditional readers, like non-Jews, please don't vote for the Labour Party. And I can't think, and perhaps one of you can, of an intervention like that from a newspaper in that sort of way.
No, I can't. And the Jewish vote has tended to be towards Labour in the past, but the anti-Semitism thing has not been put to bed with Labour. And again, I mean, if you look at Corbyn's record, I mean, it is a record of supporting every sort of dotty organisation across the world. And it's not surprised that the Jewish voters decided that it really no longer wants to affiliate. I mean, I think it would go back if it under a different leader to Labour, but it's not going to do so this time. The big question is, does it go somewhere else, and where does it go? And the Conservatives obviously will want it, but the Liberal Democrats will be hanging out their hat for that vote as well.
And I know that that's not the only demographic problem the Labour Party's had this week. It was, and especially because of the NEC stance on Kashmir, they have seemed to offend the Hindu vote as well. So it's quite, and perhaps Craig, if you could jump in on this, they've worsened it also in Leicester East, which was, unfortunately, we won't be able to get to see Keith Vaz stand again. He's off to run his white goods company. But what a pity it is. But they, instead of choosing a local and presumably Indian ethnic candidate, opted for an Islington councillor.
Right.
What is Labour's problem with their traditional voter bloc here?
Well, I think Labour have a strong support for Islington councillors generally. I think there's the Parliament benches are thronged with a number of people who've cut their teeth in Islington in some way or the other. I think it's a problem with not a problem, depends how you look at it, but I think undeniably momentum, this force within Labour are ruling the roost in terms of candidate selections. We've seen that in a number of seats across the country, and whether that chimes well with the local voters on the doorstep remains to be seen. But I'd be surprised if it did.
David?
I mean, in both parties, we've seen quite a lot of jiggery-pokery over candidates, and some Labour MPs faced reselection, at the hands of momentum, and of having to go through the hoops in their local constituencies, and they feared that the left was trying to depose them in order that they could install more left-wing candidates. I mean, some constituencies, parties in Labour was actually quite robust at doing that, but some well-known figures faced it. For the Conservatives, normally there's a candidates list of approved candidates. Vacancy comes round, you apply, and there's a process by which you go through interviews and selection by the local association. When an election is imminent, central office can parachute people into those seats, or at least parachute the last three into those seats. And of course, the advantage to the Conservatives of removing the whip from the MPs was that they couldn't stand as Conservatives. And so instead of having dissidents standing in those seats, the party's been able to parachute into it candidates who will support a future Conservative government.
Without a doubt, that's so completely right. And I brought up the Labour candidate problem there first, but I have a long list of, shall we say, comedy Conservative candidates. We've had so far two Tory MPs standing down, Elphick and Griffiths, because of issues to do with infidelity, and so their wives will be standing instead, which is extraordinary. That's on top of the candidate in Norfolk who had to stand down because he said women should keep their knickers on to avoid rape, and the candidate in Goa who said everybody on a certain TV program should be shot.
That's right,
so,
yeah.
but she's still standing. It's really, I won't use that word, but it's an extraordinary mess the parties seem to find themselves in, and which might be, speaking of extraordinary messes, it might be a good time to move on to the Liberal Democrats since we've not discussed them properly yet. Excluding their bar charts, which we won't go into just yet, is their problem in this election is that they become purely the UKIP on the left? Have they become a single issue party and therefore limiting their ceiling at 15%?
Well, they have, but deliberately. And what they have decided, I think, is they need to differentiate themselves from Labour. They need to be the unequivocal Remain party.
Double down.
And Labour, you see, you don't know where you are with Labour, to be absolutely honest on this issue. I mean, will they, won't they? There might be a second referendum, and if there's a second referendum, well, will we recommend the result or not? And in any case, that'll be judging a new deal which Labour has supposed to have agreed with the European Union. So it's all very vague. And the Liberals, I think, all this stuff about the Liberals forming a government is pie in the sky. It's charming, but it's pie in the sky. But what they are trying to do is to scoop up those Labour-inclined votes, which are Remain votes, which comes back to that Labour metropolitan heartland, as opposed to a working-class heartland, which is strongly Remain, and hopefully to scoop some Conservatives who are alienated by the feeling that the Conservative Party has now become a right-wing nationalist party. So we do actually have an election between as far as my political lifetime is concerned, a Conservative Party which is more right-wing than it's ever been. Mrs. Thatcher wasn't anywhere near as right-wing as people think she was, funnily enough. A Labour Party which is certainly more left-wing than I've ever known. And the Liberals are really trying to get hold of that one big, unique selling point in the middle, and that happens to be the Remain issue. They've got some problems themselves with that, of course, but people say that's not reasonable, and one or two MPs one of two candidates who are saying, well, we don't want to stand against a Remain-leaning Labour MP or a remaining other MP because that'll split the Remain vote. So they're caught a bit on their own rhetoric on this.
This might be the something to bring it up, and I do want to bring Craig in on the Liberal campaign. But before I do, is it really true that these days the Tory party is any more right-wing than they were in the 1980s as a reference point? The issue of Brexit is dividing people strongly and significantly, but what policies is it that makes them more right-wing today than then?
Well, the first policy is the way that Brexit has been pursued and the way that Boris Johnson has put round him. If you look at the cabinet around Boris Johnson, this is a cabinet. Just ask yourself a question. How many of this cabinet voted 3 times against Theresa May and his deal?
I'm a vast minority, I think.
I think probably,
is that true?
Boris voted twice against the deal, for heaven's sake.
Yes.
So he's surrounded himself with people like Priti Patel, which are way on the right as far as the party's got. The European Reform Group, which was the bloody-minded, awkward squad, Theresa May, is now at the heart of the party. And I think what we are seeing is Boris himself struggling between his own one nation instincts, because he keeps using the phrase, one nation, and then doing something which is certainly not one nation, and the people around him are not one nation. And the other problem is that the one nation Conservatives are the ones he took the whip away from.
Well, when the manifesto comes out, I shall let you know what's in it, and we can we'll go through it.
I'm sure there'll be an effective summary in one of the newspapers.
Indeed in the Parliamentary Review. Craig, the Liberal Democrats have pursued for the last couple of months a policy of saying there should be more polite discourse in politics at the same time, using a slogan called bollocks to Brexit. Can you see a problem?
I can see a bit of a problem there, and also I have to say a bit of a problem with David's summary of the middle ground between Remain and Leave being Remain, which seemed to be what you're suggesting of the Lib Dems have set out for the centre ground. And also, I mean, I think a lot of these terms like right-wing and left-wing have, in some regards, lost a bit of meaning. I mean, certainly economically, if you look at the Tories' policy, where they are promising spending on pretty much everything, where Sajid Javid gave a speech last week saying that now is the time to borrow and invest. And they want to add 20,000 police officers. They want to increase education spending. They want to increase healthcare spending. It seems to be that their basic economic platform is that we're going to spend less than Labour, but less than Labour is still a lot of money. I'd question the right wing, how far right they actually are. And obviously, I think you yourself would agree that Boris isn't right wing on many issues, unless you consider Brexit to be a right wing issue. But that would be the only one. Otherwise, I mean, he did back your close friend Ken Clarke for the leadership in 2001, I think so.
Yes, he did, and then he removed the whip from Ken, and from Amber Rudd, and from and even, for heaven's sake, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, had the whip removed from him. I mean, these people, Philip Hammond was no sort of soggy leftish conservative. I mean, Philip Hammond ran the economy. He ran the basic austerity program. I mean, he would certainly describe himself as a sort of new Thatcherite, I suspect. So that these people who were kicked out of a party for infidelity over Brexit were not soggy left wingers by and large. They were people pretty solidly in the centre. I mean, Ken Clarke. Ken's not some totally soggy left wing. I mean, Ken was a pretty robust Chancellor of the Exchequer, for heaven's sake.
But a bit of a federalist.
I know Ken. Well, I know, but Ken. I mean, Ken's had more cabinet experience than the whole of the present cabinet put together.
Yes, quite. Well, we do have.
What is it worth saying? Sorry, just let me. What's happening in Britain? It's not exclusive to Britain. I mean, politics is a terrible mess in Spain as well. But if you look in France, you have a new president who set up his own party, and the old parties are still not got their act together in any way. In Germany, you've got the end of the Merkel regime. You've got the Alternative for Deutschland, which is doing reasonably well, alarmingly well, if you like, in regional elections. And their coalition is a very sort of wobbly coalition. It's not certain that Merkel can get to the end of her term. And so you are finding that this, what is happening in British politics, perhaps because of Brexit, is nonetheless a phenomenon which you can see elsewhere, maybe for other reasons. In Spain, it's to do, of course, with independence and Catalonia and that sort of thing. But it is happening elsewhere. So what we are seeing is the plates are moving everywhere.
You're right. I think when history's written,
and don't forget, we've never mentioned Scotland up to now.
Well, maybe we will do actually in just a bit, because and you're right, when history is written about this bit of history, it will there will be patterns that across the countries, and people say that the Liberal Democrats, by the way, might experience a problem of being squeezed in this election. But it doesn't bode well for them that in this segment we've barely managed to talk about them at all. We will just bring up the Brexit Party. They've decided, as Craig said earlier, to stand down in the 317 seats. The Conservative Party won the last general election, which does make it easier for the Tory defence. Craig, what percentage do you think the Brexit Party will end on?
Nationally, given that they're only running in half the seats, I think 2% maximum.
John Curtis of election night fame now, the new David Butler almost, he has said that he can't see any evidence in any form that would suggest the Brexit Party is in any way capable of taking a Labour seat.
No, they said I'd be shocked if they won a single seat. I think they were polling at 10% nationally before this. Obviously, when you stop running in half your seats, that would fall to 5%. But realistically, I mean, the people who were planning to vote for a party who they thought were running a national campaign and now find out that they're not, at least half of them, probably more, will no longer vote for them.
And of course, Lance Foreman, one of MPs for London, H. Foreman and Sons, in the Review, I think, he's quite, I follow the logic here, and perhaps you can as well. If the deal is so bad, then why stand down anywhere? But if it's doable, why only stand on 317 seats?
Well, I understand that logic. Lance obviously knows what he's talking about. He wrote a fantastic article for the Parliamentary Review. Not that we shouldn't dwell too long on that. However, I mean, look, ultimately, Farage has essentially said to the country that it's okay to vote for the Tories. And so I think anybody who was in the seats where the Brexit Party are standing, anyone who was wavering between the Tories and the Brexit Party are going to break to the Tories. At least the vast majority of them are. So I think the only people who are going to vote for the Brexit Party now are people who would never have voted for the Tories, of which there are quite a lot in these Labour-held seats. So ex-Labour voters or just anti-establishment voters altogether. So I think in some of these marginals, or even seats like Bolsover, Dennis Skinner's seat that the Tories are apparently targeting, they've got a Labour over 6,000 majority there. I think the Brexit Party standing in those seats will help the Tories because it will be mostly ex-Labour voters now voting for them.
And David, before we move on to Scotland, David, how do you see the Brexit Party ending up here?
I think it's going to have a pretty disastrous election. Remember UKIP? Remember when UKIP looked like it was sweeping the country, but it didn't turn it into votes?
Quite.
And then it had a catastrophic election because people turned back to the Tories. And actually what has happened in a lot of Conservative associations, you asked me about the party being right-wing. I mean, quite a lot of people who were UKIP supporters have actually joined the local Conservative associations and have influence the way those associations behave on the ground. And I think that's happened really all over the country. The other thing that's happened to Farage, of course, is backers have been telling him, Nigel, back off. You know, Boris's deal is about as good, i.e. as bad, as we can get. And the danger is if you don't back off, you'll end up with Corbyn and then all the stuff about there'll be 2 referendums and goodness knows what else. And Aaron Banks, who is a fairly ebullient and extremely well-heeled supporter of Leave, has been saying to Farage, knock it off, Nigel, come on. And I think, it's probably a bit too late now to withdraw any more because I think nominations have to be in today.
I think there's about 45 minutes left, so you never know.
But I mean, don't forget, some of his own people are not very happy about this. He may have to reimburse some of them the costs which they've incurred.
Now, what we'll do before we'll have to move on because of time. We'll speak again much nearer the election. Can I have your predictions now for the final outcome with 5 weeks to go, David?
I think the Conservatives will be the biggest party. I don't think it'll be a huge overall majority if there's one at all. I think Labour will do very badly. I think the Scott Nats will end up with a significant bunch of seats. I mean, they could end up, they've got 35 seats out of 59 now. They could, at worst, if you like, eliminate the Conservatives and Labour from Scotland entirely. So they could end up with 40 to 45 seats if things go really, really well for them. The Liberals, as I said before, I don't think they're going to have a sensational election, but let's say they do gain 10 or 11 seats, perhaps it really does work. That means there's a block of 60 seats perhaps, which have got to be overcome before you start looking at your majority over Labour.
Absolutely. I think, and what could be very interesting in Scotland, clearly the Labour vote is collapsing there. Mr Corbyn has had, I think, 4 positions on an independence referendum in Scotland in the last 48 hours.
Exactly.
It will be whether those voters care more about the Union or whether they hate the Conservatives.
And Nicola Sturgeon is a jolly astute politician. Yes. She's effective on the screen. She's, to the point. Whether Scots actually want another referendum or not, I don't know. But she's got hold of this issue, and Brexit has made that an issue. And, of course, we do have to face the possibility that it could be that one of the consequences for Brexit is the breakup of the United Kingdom. I mean, it sounds, oh gosh, surely not, at the end of the day. But you never know. We might need Hadrian's Wall yet.
Well, thanks for the prediction, David, from not quite a Tory majority of the breakup of the UK, Craig.
I think just about I say just about, I think there'll be a decent enough Tory majority for Boris to govern. I think for the first time in 9 years, I think we'll see a genuinely workable majority. But if not, people say it's the most unpredictable election for years. Actually, it is maybe seat by seat, but I think nobody expects anyone other than the Tories to be the largest party. So maybe it's not as unpredictable as people do think.
And David, sorry?
Of course, what the Liberals want is that they hold the balance of power. They won't go into coalition, but I think they will support a government which would give them their second referendum.
So go back to your constituencies and prepare.
I wouldn't go back and prepare for government, no. But with a bit of luck, we might just have enough power to twist their arms so that the only way they can govern is to give us a second referendum. So don't rule that out completely. And my God, that would really lead to politics of, the politics of I won't say destruction, but a very violent politics.
Interesting question to put to you, David. If Boris finds himself 20 seats short of a majority and the Lib Dems have 30 or so seats, and that is there, if they say to Boris, look, if you want to stand as Prime Minister, give us a second referendum, do you think Boris, the arch Brexiteer and leader of Vote Leave, would grant a second referendum to save his own skin?
Well, he's done things he said he wasn't going to do rather than die in his ditch. He may have no choice because he might have to say, well, if I don't say yes, then the alternative will be a Labour government backed by the Liberals, and the Labour government would say yes to that and a Scottish referendum. So he may conclude he's got no choice. He hates every minute of it, but that is better than the only alternative which is now available on the grounds that the country will not want another quick election.
Now, thankfully, we have about 5 weeks left to talk about this, everybody. So that's enough election talk for now. Thank goodness I hear you cry. Now, each month we'll be having a guest discuss a pet topic of theirs. And today we welcome our very own Matthew O'Neill, Director of Communications here at The View, discussing the importance of preserving aesthetics in buildings and their environments. Matthew.
Thank you for having me on. Well, what I'd like to talk about today is a very different issue from what you've been talking about for the last 20 minutes or so. And it's a very important issue to me. It's the importance of preserving historic buildings and aesthetics and environments, and what we can do to help in that way. And for me, it's not just about preserving historic buildings or an aesthetic image of a city or indeed Britain. It's preserving a human-centric environment. What we have that's at risk at the moment is not just the erasure of the past, but the abolishment of a collective person-centric way of life. And I think that can be identified very easily in two examples of preservation at risk. Number one is the protected views of St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, St. Paul's Cathedral has a legal requirement in urban planning around it so that its views are not obstructed from certain points. And also entailed in that is that the view should not be ruined in any way by any visual obstructions behind or close to it. Now, we see that the height of new buildings within the City of London are ever going up in contravention of the regulations. There are encroachments. One in particular is a building being built in Stratford called Manhattan Loft Gardens. It's 42 stories tall. It's a rather ghastly glass and steel building, and it encroaches on the view from King Henry VIII's Mound in Richmond Park onto St. Paul's. It appears directly behind the cathedral itself. So this is just an example of one of the things that we're fighting in London itself. When it comes to buildings on their own, I think the most important example of this would be the Middlesex Guildhall, which is currently home to the Supreme Court. Now, it's a Grade 2 listed building, not just the exterior, but the interiors. It had some of the finest early 20th century courtrooms in Britain. It was designed by J.S. Gibson in the Art Nouveau Gothic style and was quite remarkable. However, when the conversion process to change it into the Supreme Court happened, a lot of the interiors were destroyed. So I think the issues that we're looking at here is not just holding individual builders and contractors to account and developers, but also government agencies from granting planning permission for these large skyscrapers and also from using these historic buildings for their own purposes in contravention to current listing status. I do think that there is a few rays of light, as it were, for the human-centric environment, and that is modern classicism. If we look at examples such as the Prince of Wales new town, Panbury in Dorset, which is built in a classical style, built around the pedestrian, built around the human, and it built around a sense of shared community, as opposed to the kind of cold, isolating modern architecture that we seem to be seeing in ever-increasing numbers. And also the Richmond Riverside development by Quinlan Terry in Richmond, which provides flats, offices, and commercial premises in a kind of pleasing classical style. For me, I think the most important thing here is continuity. It's a calming environment, and it's built around people. But the most important thing in these environmental times is the sustainability of these buildings. They last longer than modern buildings. Lots of them employ very environmental friendly building techniques such as wool insulation. And the building of them requires lots of workers, lots of jobs are provided for these people, both in skilled and unskilled labor. And also it's preserving the skilled trades. So what I'm really getting at is that it is important for us not to only protect the past, but also to build the future in a way that remains a sense of identity amongst the populace. And it can be a clear rejection of post-bellum decline. What are your thoughts as a former housing minister, David?
Well, I have to confess two things. I mean, basically, I read history at university, so I'm in favour of old things. Secondly, I own a Grade 2 listed barn, which has cost me a king's ransom to restore and keep propped up and all the rest, but it's an absolutely lovely 17th century building. The problem we have now is the huge demand for housing and the demand which governments face to relax the planning permission rules, because we can't. And the one thing developers will all say to you is, "Oh, it's such a complicated business getting planning permission. How can we swing it?" If you go to the villages around me, almost every single village has got a sign in every house saying, "Save this village, save that village," because people are very hostile to what they see as the drowning of traditional communities in new housing. And yet, we've got immigration is one of the main reasons why there's a big demand. The latest figures show that actually immigration is at an all-time high from outside the European Union, despite what governments say. And I think what we need to do is perhaps we need to look and make sure what we are building meets proper conservation targets. The thing which won was an architectural prize was houses which were built using recycled material. And we need to be, I think, rather more rigorous in making sure that at least we're trying to save the planet at the same time as we're building new properties.
Now, Matt, on that point, because if you brought up a lot of exceptionally juicy points we could get into there. The first point there, and David has alluded to this, I think, quite strongly. It's all very well and good, but is this just a vehicle for NIMBYism to travel on?
I don't think it is. I think it's a way of providing not just an enjoyable environment for people, an aesthetically pleasing environment for people, but an environment that's built to last. We are living in a city surrounded by buildings built 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago, buildings that have stood the test of time. When we look at buildings that were built in the mid-century period of the 20th century, a lot of these buildings were not built to last. They were built on a very short-term way of thinking. And the architectural styles and methods employed were not sustainable. So I do think that the future of housing and the future of architecture in general, in order to be green, is we have to look to the building methods of the past, when we did not have to deal with so many man-made substances that do not biodegrade and do not fit in well with the natural environment. It's all about living in harmony.
Now, today is Prince Charles's birthday, so I don't want to offend him by saying fake, heartless, authoritarian, and grimly cute. Not the Prince of Wales, but Poundbury. It has its critics as well.
Well, Poundbury can be derided by those who don't live there. But the people who do live there tell you that it is a lovely community to live in, and that's the important thing about it. It's not a housing estate. It's a new community with shops and restaurants and places of business that are built around people. I know that the Duchy of Cornwall has just started on a new development, quite larger than Poundbury, in Cornwall itself, near Newquay, I believe, which is due for completion in about 40 years' time. I think this is where we should be looking for examples of new towns, because I think you'd have less pushback from local communities if you were going to have communities built in harmony with the local area versus something that's just been dropped out of a prefab factory.
Now, if I can ask the panel in response to this, perhaps, and I'm sure that Matthew would happily jump in as well. I think it was quite a few years ago now the government began its Building Better, Building Beautiful, which has more attention, of course, because of the sacking of Sir Roger Scruton from it, rather than anything else they do. But clearly there is somebody in a government who perhaps does share the views, perhaps not enough. Craig?
Well, I think Roger Scruton is back now after all that controversy. It was an unpaid role, so it seemed a bit unfair on him. But I think he's back. I know that Michael Gove was very briefly the housing spokesman, shadow housing spokesman, when David Cameron first became Conservative leader in 2006. And he very much backed that the Scruton way of thinking, saying that we should build a lot of houses, but they should all be beautiful and aesthetic and things that people like to look at. Which is, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. I think the problem is the practicalities and how you get businesses to do that, do we do that even if it's considerably more expensive than other methods of building?
I think the other thing to mention on this is the social justice impact of these new classical towns. When it comes to social housing, typically they're not built in the most aesthetically pleasing way. Therefore, the individuals who have to live in these communities are deprived of a sense of joy, as it were, and a sense of pride in their homes. These new towns, such as Poundbury and the other town that's being built by the Duchy of Cornwall, the social housing is exactly the same as the off-the-peg house for an individual moving to Poundbury. That is the requirement from the duchy. So you do get a true sense of a egalitarian community where both halves are living side by each in exactly the same conditions.
And David, given your experience here, do you think it's possible to reconcile what Matt said with building enough homes and facilities for the next generation?
I'm not sure it is in the short term. Don't forget, an awful lot of things which are built as a condition of getting planning permission for private homes. It's section 104, I think. I can't remember quite what section it is. But a developer wants to build up an estate and he'll get planning permission on condition that a certain number of those houses are social housing. And, of course, those are nowhere near as profitable as the housing for owner occupation. Just like he might get permission to build the estate, but he's got to build a new school to go with it, or he's got to build a new doctor's surgery. One forgets the extent to which developments in the UK are spin-offs from fundamental planning permission for basic housing. Now, I live not too far from Cambridge. I mean, the pressures on development around Cambridge are huge, to the extent that people are talking about the need to build 5,000 or 10,000 houses in places. These are not just several hundred houses. There's talk of developing the Cambridge-Oxford corridor for development. And we're really talking about huge numbers of housing there. And that will be absolutely crucial that those are built in a way which we are proud of them, rather than we say, oh my God, they've put them up as quickly as they possibly can, as cheaply as they possibly can. What's the carbon emissions going to be from all these properties?
Matthew, I'll give you the last word.
Well, thank you. I do understand that there are difficulties in building structures which are far more intricate and they are more expensive. But it's about making an investment, and it's making an investment not in buildings but in people. And that is what modern classicism and preserving our historic environments is all about.
I think thank you very much for that segment. Indeed, thank you all for listening. We'll be back on polling day. I hope you can all endure the next few weeks. We'll do our best. In the meantime, we'll continue the discussion in the Red Line, where we'll be raising a glass in review fashion to raising standards. Goodbye.